The carriage raced down the road, wheels clattering as a man in a red jacket drove. Inside, a white-haired woman clutched her head in panic, realizing she'd somehow been transported into another body and another world entirely. She cried that she had to get off the carriage before something terrible happened, thrashing as her companion tried to restrain her. The driver stared in confusion as she shouted for him to stop. Gradually, she calmed down enough to piece things together. Her soul, belonging to Seong Kim, had been sucked into a smut novel called Conquering My Duke. Horrified, she realized she was inhabiting the body of Eileen White, a name so lazy it made her scoff. The story itself was awful, filled with repetitive, soulless lines, and she couldn't believe she had ever finished reading it. Trying to remember how it happened, Sayoung recalled napping in the Seoul National University Library before hearing a strange voice wish her good luck. Now, a mustached man outside was crying and calling her Eileen, bidding her farewell as she stepped out of the carriage. She froze in disbelief. She really was Eileen White. Her frustration boiled over as she realized she'd worked her entire life to enter that prestigious university, only to wake up as a poor noblewoman in a trashy web novel. Reviewing the plot, she remembered Eileen's debt-ridden family had sold her off as a bride. When the carriage stopped, a handsome man greeted her warmly, calling her my dear wife. Stunned, she recognized him as Duke Caden Crown, the male lead, and remembered their contract marriage one year. No physical contact or the money would be forfeited. Seeing him up close, she finally understood why the original Eileen broke the rule, but she quickly scolded herself not to fall for his face. The Duke escorted her to her luxurious chambers, filled with priceless furniture. When he told her everything in the room was hers, she was floored. Before leaving, he invited her to dine later, his faintly worried tone lingering in her mind. Alone, Seong organized her thoughts. This was a world she knew, and her goal was simple. Endure the contract for a year, earn 100 million gold, and find a way home. She could handle this. But first, she needed money fast. Remembering a place called Mage's Alley, she planned to buy a scroll of interdimensional travel, though it would cost a fortune. Eyeing her lavish surroundings, she decided she could start by selling the expensive furnishings. Determined, she vowed not to fall for the Duke, no matter how handsome he was. All she had to do was survive a year, earn the gold, buy the scroll, and get the hell out of this ridiculous world. Everything in the room looked perfect for her plans. Each piece of furniture, every ornament, was worth a fortune. Just as she began assessing what to sell first, a knock startled her. A maid entered, saying she had come to escort her to dinner. Seong quickly remembered the Duke's invitation, awkwardly blurting, "Gotcha!" before catching herself and replying more properly that she would be right out. Once the maid left, she sighed in relief, realizing she'd have to be careful not to sound out of place. This life wasn't going to be easy, but at least she had a plan. If everything here belonged to her, she could sell whatever she wanted and start saving for that scroll. She headed downstairs, where Duke Caden Crown greeted her with his calm, composed smile. No matter how she looked at him, he was stunning. His elegant posture, his violet eyes, his soft hair. When he asked if they should go, she could only nod. At dinner, he courteously pulled out her chair, and she couldn't help but think that maybe this marriage wasn't such a bad deal after all. Caden told her he'd asked the staff to prepare dishes suited to her taste. The first plate arrived, and she froze at the sight of a strange fish monster thing. Pretending enthusiasm, she claimed it was her favorite, only to nearly gag on the first bite. The taste was dreadful, but she forced a smile, praising it as amazing just to stay polite. She noticed that he matched her pace as she ate, patient and considerate. When he mentioned he'd heard she disliked the cold and would have a special coat made for her, she was genuinely touched. Maybe he wasn't just handsome. Maybe he was a genuinely good man. Guilt pricked her for how rudely she had acted earlier. If things stayed like this, a year would be easy, she thought. When dessert arrived, she took one bite and nearly melted. It was heavenly. The sweetness washed away the earlier horror. Realizing she was devouring it too eagerly, she quickly composed herself. Cheeks flushed as Caden chuckled softly. As the evening ended, he apologized for keeping her so long and bid her good night. She blinked in confusion when he left, but then remembered the key rule: no physical contact. Of course, they'd sleep in separate rooms. Back in her chamber, she mused over how the original Eileen had fallen for him and ruined everything. Foolish, she thought, but understandable. He was charming, kind, and heartbreakingly beautiful. Still, she couldn't afford to waver. Her goal was clear: earn the money, buy the scroll, and go home. Yet, as her mind settled, a new question surfaced. Why had Caden agreed to this arrangement in the first place? Why would someone so rich and composed pay so much for a year-long contact-free marriage? At that very moment, in a dim, locked chamber deep within the estate, Caden Crown writhed in agony. His shirt hung in tatters, and iron chains clinked as he strained against them. Each night, unbearable pain consumed him. He clenched his teeth, gasping that he wouldn't let it defeat him. Whatever curse bound him, he intended to endure it, no matter how much it hurt. Morning sunlight streamed through the curtains as birds chirped outside. Seong stretched, still adjusting to this new life, when a knock came at her door. A maid politely informed her that breakfast would soon be ready, and Seong scrambled up, calling, "Coming!" At the table, a maid set down the meal with a soft clink, and Seong's eyes sparkled. The dishes looked heavenly, normal food at last. She sighed, wishing last night's dinner had been this good. While eating, she casually asked about the maid who escorted her carriage yesterday. The servant replied that the girl was probably in the gardens, not wanting to disturb her rest. Seong instantly saw through the excuse, assuming the poor girl was still traumatized by her earlier outburst. Deciding a walk would clear her head, she wandered into the vast gardens and soon spotted the same maid. Awkwardly, she apologized for yesterday, blaming her behavior on marriage blues. The maid blinked in confusion at the unfamiliar phrase, and Seong's heart skipped. Clearly, that term didn't exist here. Still, since the maid hadn't reported anything, Seong concluded she was safe. Perfect, she thought, relieved, then cheerfully added that they'd get along well. The maid nodded hesitantly. Elsewhere, deep in the forest, Duke Caden Crown was out hunting with his attendant Sid. Sid proudly held up a fox pelt, shouting, "Number 33!" and praising Caden as the best hunter in the land, better even than the Crown Prince. Caden warned him to watch his tongue, but Sid brushed it off, saying no one could hear them. When asked what the pelts were for, Caden replied they'd be used to craft a fur coat for his new duchess. Sid gaped, teasing that his master was more romantic than he let on. They spoke briefly of the duchess's whereabouts. Sid mentioned she was strolling through the gardens, and Caden remarked that as long as she was under his roof, he'd ensure her comfort. He regretted ending their talk abruptly the night before, but Sid lightened the mood by suggesting he take her to the upcoming ball. The mention of the moon made Caden tense. He muttered that he wouldn't risk being out on such a night. Still, he reconsidered and told Sid to escort her in his stead, insisting she enjoy herself. Back at the mansion, Seong rested mid-walk, legs aching as she admired the sprawling grounds and shimmering lake. The place was breathtaking, but far too large. A whole year here. She sighed, already plotting to speed things up. Selling valuables was still her best bet. When her eyes caught a small golden ornament glinting in the sun, temptation struck. I could sell that, she thought, justifying that no one would notice something so tiny. But as soon as she picked it up, a voice behind her made her freeze. "Is something the matter?" Caden stood there, fresh from a swim, water glistening on his skin. She yelped, dropping the trinket, heart racing. He simply smiled and apologized that he wouldn't be joining her for dinner. She forced a cheerful, "Oh, thank you," while he, unaware of her guilt, thought she must have already accepted Sid's invitation to the ball. He asked her to enjoy the evening and departed on horseback. That night, in the crowded alleys of the city, Seong haggled furiously with a shady shopkeeper over the golden cherub statue she'd borrowed. "Only 50,000! She shouted. The merchant explained it was hollow, barely worth 10. Grinding her teeth, Seong demanded to know how expensive a scroll of interdimensional travel could possibly be. The witch-hatted woman laughed, saying even the cheapest was a luxury. When Seong pressed for a price, the merchant smirked and revealed the number. 100 million gold. Seong slammed into the table with a loud thunk, yelling, "You thieving bastard!" The witch cackled, vanishing in a puff of smoke, promising to see her again. Left fuming with an empty purse, Seong realized she'd been completely duped. She clutched her head, groaning, "Crap!" As the alley lights flickered around her, her first grand plan had already gone up in smoke. Seong trudged back from Mage's Alley, clutching her half-empty purse. She'd been scammed, and even the little money she got for the hollow statue felt worthless. Slumping in her seat, she groaned internally that this whole situation was a disaster. Still, she tried to console herself. At least the shopkeeper promised to hold the scroll. All she needed now was to earn enough gold, and she could finally go home. But doubt crept in. What if the merchant had lied about it being the last one? And what if someone discovered the theft? A faint rattle outside her window made her flinch. She wrapped her arms around her knees, overcome with homesickness. She missed her own world, her bed, her campus life, even the dull routine she used to complain about. A sudden thud startled her, followed by a rush of air. She opened the window too quickly, hit her head, and peered outside to see what was happening. Before she could regain her balance, the carriage jolted and she tumbled out, landing face first in mud. The coachman rushed over, addressing her as "Your Grace," worried for her well-being. She forced a tired assurance that she was fine, though inwardly she cursed her luck. First, she had been swindled. Now she was drenched in filth. When the coachman admitted the carriage couldn't be moved, he suggested they return on foot. Exhausted and miserable, she followed him through the muddy path until they finally reached the estate. He bid her good night, and she managed a weak laugh, telling herself all she needed was a warm bath and a soft bed. But as she entered her chamber, she froze. A tall, dark figure stood motionless in the center of the room. At first, she assumed it was a statue, an incredibly valuable one, judging by its size. As she stepped closer, the figure suddenly moved, emitting a low growl that made her blood run cold. Sid burst into the room, pushing her aside and shouting for her to get away. He stumbled, clutching his head, then fled down the corridor, leaving her bewildered and alone. She sat on the floor in shock, realizing he had abandoned her. The growling grew louder, and she turned toward the advancing shape, her heart pounding. She tried to flee but twisted her ankle and fell. The creature leapt forward, pinning her beneath its weight. Fear flooded through her as she gasped that this couldn't be how it ended. She had only been here for a day. She still had plans, dreams, a life to return to. Refusing to give in, she struggled fiercely, determined to survive. Then the moonlight illuminated the creature's face, and her eyes widened in disbelief. It was Duke Caden. The realization hit her like a blow. He was a werewolf. Shock and anger warred within her as she pushed against his chest, thinking bitterly that this was no way for a husband to treat his wife. Summoning her strength, she grabbed a golden chamber stick from nearby and struck him hard across the head. He collapsed beside her, and she stared at his unconscious form, breathing heavily. The staff soon rushed in, startled to find her standing over the fallen Duke. The maid from earlier screamed his name. Young, covered in mud and trembling, insisted that he wasn't dead. At least, she hoped not, forcing an awkward smile. Young thought back to her old life, the endless exams, the sleepless nights, the people who doubted her. Getting into Seoul National University had taken every ounce of effort she had, and yet she'd done it despite everyone's negativity. Her hand clenched unconsciously. If someone like Caden Crown had been around back then, someone calm, kind, and encouraging, he probably would have defended her from all those who mocked her. But now, that same man lay before her, motionless on the floor. The servants rushed in and confirmed that he was only unconscious. Relief washed over her. At least she wasn't a murderer. Still, as she looked at his face, the pointed ears and faint fangs unsettled her. Was this really the gentle Duke she'd been married off to? She wondered if the marriage contract had ever mentioned his true nature. But she'd possessed Eileen's body right after the signing, never having read the terms. Asking for it now would seem suspicious. Searching her memory, she vaguely recalled something about a childhood curse in the novel, though the details escaped her. All she truly knew was the deal. 1 year of marriage for 100 million gold, the exact amount she needed for the interdimensional scroll. Selling everything she owned wouldn't come close, and getting caught stealing again wasn't an option. As she pondered, Sid, the man who had bolted earlier, peeked into the room. She called out sharply, startling him. When she demanded his name, he stammered it out and apologized repeatedly for abandoning her. Trying to make sense of what had happened, she turned to the staff and asked if the Duke was cursed. The older butler exchanged uneasy looks with the head maid before retreating down the hall, leaving the maid to awkwardly admit that technically yes, though it was under control. She explained that the Duke usually stayed in the basement at night, so she thought Seung would be safe. Sid's eyes widened at the mention of a basement, muttering something about dungeons. The maid quickly denied it, insisting it was just a basement. Seung muttered that a warning would have been nice. She sighed heavily. Living like this was impossible. This was supposed to be a smut novel, not a horror story. As her thoughts spiraled, a ridiculous but desperate idea struck her. Maybe curses in these stories were broken by a kiss. The logic was flimsy, but it was something. She announced her theory, prompting Sid to stare at her in disbelief before she snapped at him to leave. He didn't hesitate. When the room finally fell silent, Seung crouched beside the Duke. She reminded herself that in the original story, Eileen had fallen for him almost instantly. It was love at first sight. If she just acted the part, maybe the curse would lift. She imagined the perfect outcome. The Duke waking up, grateful, promising her anything she wanted in return. She'd modestly wave it off, then add one little condition: a divorce and 100 million gold settlement. It was, she thought smugly, a flawless plan. Only one problem: she'd never actually kissed anyone before. She hesitated, remembering a moment from her past, laughing with a friend about how she'd save her first kiss for someone important. This wasn't what she'd had in mind. But desperate times called for desperate measures. Steeling herself, she placed a hand on his cheek and leaned closer. Her heartbeat thundered in her ears as her lips brushed his. Then a sharp snapping sound startled her. Before she could react, Caden jerked awake, eyes glowing gold, and shoved her back. She hit the floor hard, gasping as servants burst into the room, alarmed by the commotion. The Duke, dazed and still half-shifted, lay face down as the staff stared, horrified. By the next morning, everything seemed eerily normal. Caden, freshly bandaged, greeted her politely and asked how the ball had gone. She stammered that it had been lovely, though she hadn't gone at all. He smiled warmly, saying he was glad, and she forced a laugh, her eyes flicking to the bandages she'd caused. She tried to apologize indirectly, mumbling that she hoped it didn't hurt, then quickly changed the subject. Caden's expression softened, and he told her she could call him by his name. When she tried, his bright smile nearly blinded her. Gathering her courage, she attempted to steer the conversation toward the marriage contract, claiming she just wanted to review it since her memory wasn't great. But his smile faded. "I knew it," he said quietly. "You want to return home?" Young froze, stammering a denial, insisting it wasn't like that. Though her mind raced, she told herself that asking to see the contract shouldn't be a crime, but knew she already looked suspicious. Pretending memory loss would only make him call a doctor, so she decided to risk the truth with a cheerful mask, imagining herself boldly confessing that she wasn't Eileen White at all, but someone who had read this fictional world, just wanting to reread the contract. In reality, Caden lowered his gaze and quietly murmured that he understood. She must dislike him. He accepted it sadly, saying he couldn't blame her for being forced into the marriage. A maid's distant voice cried that it wasn't true as dishes clattered in the background. His voice trembled, admitting he didn't expect to feel so hurt. Panicking, Seyoung rushed to assure him he was mistaken, blurting that she didn't dislike him at all, that this place was great, and flustered, even added that he was handsome before realizing what she'd said. Embarrassed, she pleaded again that she truly couldn't remember the contract and just wanted to see it. Her desperation made Caden pause, then he smiled again, agreeing they could look after their meal. Overjoyed, she thanked him, enjoying breakfast with unusual enthusiasm. The yogurt was so good she couldn't stop praising it, and he quietly noted that she liked sweets. Good to know for later. When they finished, he asked if she was ready, and together they went to his office. The vast room stunned her, shelves upon shelves of expensive-looking books. For a moment, she imagined how much they'd sell for but quickly dismissed the idea, knowing he'd notice. Caden noticed her staring and teased that he hadn't realized she loved books so much. She jumped, flustered, claiming she was more of a movies and dramas kind of person, but that they were sort of based on books, so technically she loved them. Amused, he decided not to argue, thinking there was no point in rocking the boat. He then revealed with quiet pride that he'd actually had a library made for her. She gasped in disbelief, amazed that the original Eileen had lived this luxuriously. Struggling to keep up with him in her heavy dress and impossible heels, she muttered about how uncomfortable they were before tripping on a snagged hem. Caden instinctively caught her before she could fall, holding her close. Her heart froze. Physical contact, the one forbidden rule. She silently mourned her lost fortune, but since he said nothing, she pretended nothing had happened. He simply cleared his throat and guided her forward, showing her the grand room, declaring that everything there belonged to her. Overwhelmed, she repeated his words in disbelief. He looked relieved, assuming her excitement was pure joy. She smiled awkwardly, pretending to admire everything while mentally calculating potential resale value. The books were real leather, worth a fortune, and she was startled to find she could read them perfectly, realizing the author never even invented a language. Some titles like Crown Family, The Lineage, and Imperial Etiquette even seemed useful. Thanking him profusely, she cautiously brought the conversation back to the contract. Remembering his promise, he led her back to the desk and handed it over. The parchment looked formal, stamped with a seal. She read carefully. A 1-year marriage, no physical contact, keep the Duke's secret, reward of 100 million gold. But there was no mention of his being a werewolf. Her eyes widened. How could such a major detail be missing? Caden noticed her frown and asked if something was wrong. She forced a smile, assuring him it was nothing, but her mind raced. The contract gave no clue about his curse or why the term was exactly a year. She decided to question the staff later. Refocusing on her real mission, earning enough to buy the scroll, she straightened and promised Caden he had nothing to worry about, that she would never tell anyone. She bowed deeply, swearing he could trust her. Caden blinked, confused by her sudden formality, before giving a hesitant smile and thanking her. Seyoung decided it was time to put her new plan into action, Project Unhex. After everything she'd seen, she refused to live the rest of her life terrified of the dark. If she couldn't at least try to break Caden Crown's curse, this so-called marriage would become a year-long nightmare. She headed straight for the library, determined to find answers. Yet after just an hour, she realized it was impossible to read everything herself. So she assembled the entire household staff and declared a grand mission: gather every book mentioning wolves, curses, or hexes, and report anything useful immediately. The servants snapped to attention, replying together, "Yes, Your Grace." Melvin, the old crown butler, peeked in, startled to see the chaos. Seyoung greeted him brightly, insisting they could use another pair of eyes. Melvin blinked in confusion just as Caden appeared, asking if something was wrong. The Duke gently requested Melvin's help, confessing he worried his wife was secretly unhappy and hiding her loneliness. Melvin nodded, thinking it natural she might be upset after being sold into marriage, but he couldn't help noticing how unusually concerned Caden seemed. Meanwhile, Seyoung's research team was already deep in their work. Books towered across the floor. She ordered a maid up a ladder for another volume, even one that looked expensive, earning a shocked stare. Melvin watched from the doorway, relieved that she seemed perfectly cheerful. Sid stumbled in under another stack of books, dropping them with a loud thud and proudly announcing the last batch. Seyoung praised him and instructed him to read everything about werewolves. By the end of the day, the staff was slumped over, surrounded by piles of titles like Verawal, Jungle of, All Men Are W, and Nye. All they discovered were fragments about wolf behavior. When Seyoung asked what time the Duke usually transformed, Sid guessed around 9 at night, depending on the moon. The butler added that the curse peaked during a full moon, which perfectly explained the previous night's chaos. Seyoung gasped at the realization and immediately asked if they needed weapons. Melvin calmly assured her they didn't. The Duke was restrained in the basement. That word made her freeze. "Chained up?" she cried. The butler hastily corrected her, calling it more of a bedchamber, explaining the chains had been reinforced. Seyoung still muttered that she'd feel better with a bat. That evening, she moved to Plan A, suddenly appearing beside Caden. She startled him so badly he nearly jumped out of his skin. She laughed and said she'd had an amazing day, inwardly gloating that once she broke his curse, their contract would be void and she'd get her 100 million gold payout early. Then she could buy the scroll and escape this ridiculous world. Caden, recovering, commented on her good mood, and she teased that something good was coming soon. He chuckled and invited her to dinner. Throughout the meal, she kept grinning to herself, thinking he had no idea what was coming. Her mind ran through every detail of her plan. Phase 1, wait until the Duke went to the basement. Phase 2, use bait. Phase 3, capture him, then perform the cure. When she saw him head downstairs, she rallied the servants and shouted for them to move out. Down in the basement, she unveiled her bait, a large fish she called Primo Salmon. Wolves liked meat, she reasoned, and this was close enough. The servants gave her nervous looks but followed orders. When she peeked inside, the transformed Duke snarled against his chains, but they held firm. Sayoung held up the fish and called to him, tossing it forward to get his attention. When he lunged for it, she tugged the signal rope and a bell rang through the hall. The staff charged in on cue, surrounding the distracted werewolf and pulling the ropes tight. Caden was quickly restrained again, his golden eyes dim with confusion. Sayoung stepped forward proudly, brushing off her sleeves. It was time for phase 4, the cure itself. Facing the bound werewolf, she steadied her breath and smiled awkwardly. Sayoung leaned toward the restrained, transformed Duke, ready to test her theory. The werewolf froze in surprise, his golden eyes wide. Earlier that day, during her frantic research, Sid had reported that nearly every book pointed to one solution: a kiss. He'd questioned the point of it all, but Sayoung snapped that if he truly wanted to help his master, he'd keep reading. Every reference she found said the same thing, whether it was a fairy tale, a curse manual, or a romantic novel. Annoyed, she muttered that the author clearly lacked imagination if the cure was always just a kiss, instead of something like a spell or relic. Now, back in the basement, the werewolf strained against his chains. Sayoung ordered him to stop resisting and warned that if he didn't behave, he'd lose his reward. At the mention of fish, he quieted, earning a relieved good boy from her. She leaned in and gave him a quick kiss on the cheek, waiting for something, anything to happen. But nothing did. She frowned, thinking maybe it needed to be on the lips. She sighed and tried again, but the werewolf growled louder, thrashing in protest. She forced another attempt, then another, until she was breathless and dizzy. Still, there was no change. Frustrated, she shouted for the staff to fall back. They all scrambled out of the basement, collapsing on the floor above, exhausted and terrified. Covered in rope and sweat, Sayoung smiled brightly, assuring everyone they'd try again next time. The servants stared at her in horror as she declared that Sayoung Kim never quits, trying to get them to chant encouragement with her. The next morning, over breakfast, Caden noticed her reading a thick book on enchantments. He gently asked if she was interested in magic. Startled, she laughed awkwardly, claiming it just looked interesting. She considered telling him about her secret plan. Maybe they could strike a deal. She'd break the curse, and he'd pay her early, but quickly dismissed it. Caden asked how she slept, and though she remembered last night's chaos vividly, she answered cheerfully that she'd never slept better. He smiled warmly, relieved, and she thought how kind he always seemed in the morning. Then her imagination ran wild. If she confessed, he'd probably react dramatically, apologizing for burdening her and begging her to seek her own happiness. Horrified at the image, she snapped out of it with a loud outburst that startled everyone in the dining room. She hastily excused herself, leaving Caden watching her retreat, misinterpreting it as regret. He sighed, thinking she must be homesick and secretly miserable. Meanwhile, Sayoung was spiraling. She'd broken the contract, rules multiple times, and even attacked him. If he ever found out, she'd be thrown out and left penniless. Slumping in despair, she lamented how unfair this was, how much she missed her old life, and fried chicken. Then realization struck. Every book said kiss, but fairy tales said true love's kiss. Maybe that was the difference. They had to fall in love. She froze at the thought, repeating the words in disbelief. A servant cautiously asked if she was all right, but she barely heard. Caden was handsome, kind, and charming, the Empire's ideal man, but could she really fall for a werewolf? She shook her head and decided it was too much trouble. Curses, love, and destiny could wait. Marching back to her room, she grinned to herself. For now, she'd switch strategies entirely. Forget breaking the curse. It was time to start selling everything. Caden asked if his wife seemed unhappy, or had ever mentioned wanting to return home. Melvin immediately replied no. Caden frowned, remembering how terrified she'd been when she first signed the contract. Her hands trembling, her eyes filled with fear. The narration flashed back to that day. While Seung's soul had been peacefully napping in another world, the Duke had gone to collect the White family's debts, and instead left with their daughter. To an outsider, it might have looked like love at first sight, but it couldn't have been further from the truth. Eileen's mother had begged the Duke to care for her daughter, while Eileen herself had cried helplessly. Caden had simply noted that they already knew his reputation as the cursed Duke. Back in the present, he sighed, relieved she seemed fine now, though he couldn't shake the worry that she was only pretending. Melvin thought privately that she seemed more energetic than distraught, especially considering she'd knocked the Duke unconscious on their first night, but he couldn't say that aloud. Caden instructed Melvin to look after her and attend to anything she might need. Melvin agreed faithfully, though he found the Duke's growing concern almost excessive. Meanwhile, Seung had launched Plan B. After the failure of Project Unhex, she decided it was time to sell everything that wasn't nailed down. She directed servants to move tables, pack tea sets, and clear the room. A maid nervously asked if she was really selling all of it. Seung admitted she didn't need them, but sighed that even this wouldn't come close to 100 million gold. Another maid, Julie, admired a delicate cup and hesitated. Seung, feeling slightly guilty, told her to trade one of her own if she wanted it. Julie lit up and cheekily asked if she could take the chair too, earning an indulgent shrug. Still, despite all that, the mountain of items seemed endless. When the merchant arrived, Seung rushed to negotiate. He started at 5,000 gold, but she protested that everything was ultra-high quality. They haggled fiercely until he agreed to 4,250. She celebrated the sale, until counting the total left her deflated. 500,000 gold, barely a fraction of what she needed. The interdimensional scroll remained hopelessly out of reach. She groaned, wishing she could sell the mansion itself. That night at dinner, Caden commented casually that he'd heard she'd been selling furniture. She nearly choked. When she asked how he knew, he laughed, crediting his trusty Melvin. Fuming, she cursed the butler in her head. Caden gently asked if she disliked the furniture. She denied it, realizing too late he might have taken it personally, since he'd furnished the room for her. Trying to recover, she claimed she just wanted to redecorate. The moment the words left her mouth, she regretted them. He looked slightly hurt. After a pause, he leaned forward and asked softly if he might be blunt. "My dear wife," he said, "are you in need of money?" Seung's eyes lit up and she blurted out yes, before panicking and backtracking, shouting, "No, of course not!" Caden sighed, apologizing that he hadn't noticed sooner. She kept insisting it was fine, but when he asked how much she needed, she almost confessed 100 mil, before stopping herself and muttering quite a bit. Without hesitation, Caden called for Melvin. Seung froze, convinced she'd doomed herself. But instead of scolding her, Caden calmly instructed, "I want my dear wife to have Vault 5. Seung blinked, speechless. A vault? Melvin bowed deeply, apologizing that they hadn't anticipated her needs sooner. She awkwardly waved him off, still trying to process the idea. Then, curiosity taking over, she asked, "If this is Vault 5, does that mean there are others?" Melvin confirmed with a polite smile. "Of course, Your Grace." When she asked how much was in Vault 5, Melvin replied thoughtfully, "If I recall correctly, around 10 million gold." Seung nearly fainted. She nearly dropped the key. 10 million per vault? And there were 10 vaults! Her brain spun as she did the math. 100 million gold total. Melvin explained that the vaults were originally the late Duke's hobby, and Caden continued the tradition as a way of remembering him. He turned the massive door open with a metallic creak. Seung, still stunned, asked if this was all of Caden Crown's wealth. Melvin smiled politely and said, "Of course not. The main fortune was safely kept in the royal bank. This gold was just surplus." Seung gaped, repeating the word as if it were blasphemy. "Surplus?" Melvin added that since Vault 5 was assigned to her, both the room and its contents were hers to use as she pleased. He handed her the key with a jingle. Seung stood speechless. To Caden, this was pocket change, but to her, it was life-changing wealth. She wondered why he would give her so much, knowing she'd be gone in a year. Still, as she looked down at the key, she couldn't help smiling. This was already a tenth of what she needed. She decided she'd use the 10 million as a deposit for the interdimensional scroll. If she moved quickly before the Mage's Alley shopkeeper changed her mind, she could finally make progress toward going home. Her plotting was interrupted by a knock. Sid's voice called from the hall, asking to enter. She allowed him in, and he blinked at the dim room, asking why she was sitting in the dark. Seung gave a mysterious smile and asked what he wanted. Grinning, Sid revealed a lavish fox fur coat, proudly saying each pelt was hunted by the Duke himself. Horrified, Seung asked how many foxes it had taken. Realizing the coat was real, she cringed internally, calling it awful and cruel. Sid urged her to try it on, and she reluctantly did, thinking it looked hideous. Sid and the maid Elsa gasped in admiration, telling her she looked beautiful. Seung wondered if they were blind. When Elsa asked if she should store it for safekeeping, Seung quickly agreed, thinking the maid was sharp. Still, since it was a gift, she decided to thank the Duke personally. She wandered through the halls until she found what she assumed was his room. Knocking once, she hesitated before entering. The door creaked open. Inside, Caden was shirtless, midway through changing. She froze, gasping, as he scrambled to cover himself and apologized. Flustered, she stammered that she shouldn't have barged in. He chuckled nervously, asking if she came because she disliked the coat. Word traveled fast. She admitted she just felt bad for the foxes. Caden blinked, surprised, then gently apologized, saying he hadn't realized she liked them. Most noblewomen, he explained, viewed foxes as pests. Seung said firmly she didn't understand killing animals for fun. He paused, then declared seriously that he would never hunt again. She stared at him in disbelief, wondering if he truly meant it. He assured her it was no trouble at all, and told her to dispose of the coat if she wished. As he smiled at her kindly, Seung wondered if he was angry underneath, or if he was genuinely that considerate. He'd given her money, a home, clothes, even food. Was it all guilt, or just a way to protect his secret? She decided not to overthink it. Once she got her 100 million, she'd buy the scroll, go home, and whatever happened next would be the real Eileen's problem. She left his room deep in thought, but soon realized she was completely lost. The mansion's endless corridors all looked the same. After wandering for what felt like forever, she finally stumbled into a dark room and collapsed onto a bed, sighing in relief. The sheets were cool, and the air smelled faintly of cologne. Her contentment vanished when a deep voice cut through the dark, calm, sharp, and inhuman. "Who said you could enter?" She froze, eyes widening as the candlelight revealed a tall figure with glowing eyes and sharp fangs. It was Caden Crown, half-dressed and in his werewolf form, towering above her. Seyoung's heart stopped as realization dawned. She'd just crawled into Caden's bedroom. She quickly apologized, insisting it was a mistake. As she looked closer, she realized something was off. He was transformed, yet nothing like the violent state from before. He was lucid, speaking calmly. That startled her. Then it clicked. Tonight was only a crescent moon. The curse wasn't at full strength unless the moon was full. Caden sat down on the edge of the bed and remarked that her excuse was hard to believe. With a faint, knowing smile, he accused her of always lying. She bristled, inwardly irritated that he was right but annoyed by his bluntness. She snapped back that she wasn't lying at all and really had gotten lost, complaining about how dark the halls were and that, given how rich he was, installing lights wouldn't hurt. She apologized again, loudly and insistently, framed it as one small mistake, then abruptly told him goodnight and shut the door behind her. Outside, she paused, processing everything. So that was how he saw her. Anger replaced guilt. She felt foolish for ever feeling bad for him. After all his kindness, this was what he thought of her. Offended, she stormed away, telling herself she couldn't believe she'd fallen for his nice act. Back in his room, Caden sat silently on the bed. He heard hurried footsteps and loud movements approaching, then stopping just as suddenly. Confused, he glanced down and quietly realized his blanket was missing. The next morning, breakfast was served. The protagonist thanked the maid while still fuming about Caden's behavior the night before. As she ate, she muttered that all her effort had been wasted and wondered why she'd even tried helping him. The maid then presented a package, explaining it was from his grace. The protagonist questioned why he hadn't brought it himself, then reasoned it might be better to keep some distance for now. When she opened the box, she found a coat and a card. The note read that he thought this coat would suit her better and hoped she liked it. The maid explained that since she disliked the fur coat, Caden had this one specially made. Thick fabric, layered well and lined with wool for warmth. When the protagonist asked if sheep were harmed, the maid reassured her they were only sheared, then added how romantic it was that he'd written a card himself. Holding the coat, the protagonist realized Caden clearly didn't remember the previous night at all, which fit the rules of the curse. Still, he remembered what she'd said earlier that day. The maid admitted she'd once believed the rumors about the Duke, but now thought him far kinder than expected, noting how he even brought gifts for the staff. That made the protagonist hesitate. Maybe she should apologize. After all, he wasn't wrong. She had lied and gone behind his back repeatedly. Deciding to be the mature one, she resolved to apologize properly. She grabbed Sid and dragged him along, demanding a full tour of the mansion so she wouldn't get lost again. Sid looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, but she insisted, confident that as Seyoung Kim of Seoul National University, memorizing a floor plan couldn't be that hard. 4 hours later, she collapsed on the floor, exhausted. Sid asked if she was okay as she yelled that the mansion was absurdly huge and practically needed transportation just to get around. When Sid suggested a horse, she snapped that she hated this place and complained about how unnecessary all the rooms were. Still, she thanked him gloomily before dismissing him. Later that night, she stood outside Caden Crown's room, nerves tightening. She told herself the plan was simple: apologize, thank him for the coat, then leave. But there was one problem. It was already nighttime. She knocked. The door opened just enough to reveal Caden already transformed. This time, she wasn't lost. He coldly pointed that out. She thought he felt completely different, icy, distant, and wondered if this was truly the same man. She apologized again for barging in and tried to hand him a blanket, but he pushed it back. Frustrated, she insisted she really had been lost before and didn't understand why he kept accusing her of lying. Then she thanked him for the coat. He stared at her and asked if that was all. With a smirk, he said she owed him. Confused, she wondered what he meant. She hadn't done anything. He accused her of lying again, leaned closer, and calmly stated that she had kissed him, not just once but multiple times. She could only stare up at him, completely stunned, wondering how he could remember that when he seemed oblivious before. Since he never mentioned it earlier, she suspects some kind of selective memory. Caden smiles faintly and tells her not to bother lying her way out this time. She stares at him, baffled by how cold and sharp he suddenly feels compared to his usual gentle demeanor. She admits she shouldn't have kissed him, but snaps back that he nearly killed her and asks if he seriously doesn't remember that part. Caden acknowledges that what she says is true, then immediately states that the kisses still count as a breach of the contract and demands payment. She explodes in disbelief, insisting she only did it to help break his curse. She accuses him of pretending not to remember and reminds him there were witnesses, switching tactics. She fires back that if he's accusing her of lying, then he's doing the same. After all, trying to kill her should come with a penalty too. Pressed into a corner, Caden reluctantly admits that her method didn't actually work. She seizes on that, declaring that if it failed, he has no right to demand compensation. Caden laughs dryly, pointing out that she still attacked him. She snaps back that he attacked her first. After a brief standoff, he calls her stubborn and announces that he'll settle the matter by setting her penalty at 50 million gold. She protests furiously, but he shuts the door on her mid-argument. Left outside, she pounds on it, cursing him and begging him to cancel the penalty, horrified that he's just taken half of what she needs. The next morning, she confronts him again, breathless and determined, offering to never ask for anything again if he'll void the penalty. Caden looks genuinely confused and says he has no idea what she's talking about. She shouts that he was yelling about penalties just yesterday, but he asks her to calm down and explain everything from the beginning. Hesitating, she asks if he truly doesn't remember her coming to his room. When she clarifies she means his bedchamber, he turns pale and asks if she saw it. She admits she's known about his curse since the start. Caden looks crushed, confessing he's done everything possible to keep it hidden. He explains that in the early days of the curse, he remembered everything that happened at night. But over time, those memories faded. Now, when he transforms, it feels like his body is burning, and when he wakes, it's already morning. For most of his life, he's only truly lived half of it. She feels a flicker of sympathy but steadies herself. He's still responsible for what happens. Then a realization hits her. If he doesn't remember the nights, then maybe those events shouldn't count. She proposes a deal. Whatever happens at night is invalid. The man standing in front of her now is the real Duke, the one who runs the house and the one she married. She suggests amending the contract so nighttime incidents don't apply. Caden apologizes for whatever happened and agrees. He signs the amendment without hesitation. She beams, telling him not to worry about it anymore, casually adding that this includes the night he broke free of his restraints. He smiles nervously and assures her the new shackles are secure. Soon after, she is seen waving enthusiastically as Caden's carriage departs, delighted that her 100 million gold and her vault are safe. Light on her feet, she decides it's time to return to Mage's Alley. She asks one shopkeeper about an interdimensional scroll and is immediately turned away. Another shop gives the same answer. It dawns on her that the original merchant truly does have the last one. Approaching him again, she tells him she's here to reserve it. He casually informs her that prices have gone up and reveals the new cost, 500 million gold. She grabs him in fury, calling him a sleazeball. While he calmly explains its simple supply and demand, he suggests a deposit, 50 million. She throws down her bag, insisting she only has 10 million and that it's take it or leave it. To prove she's serious, she briefly reveals the scroll. Satisfied, he hands her a potion that induces severe nightmares as a gift, then vanishes. She curses him under her breath but starts laughing to herself. 500 million was absurd, but for someone like Caden Crown, it might be nothing at all. The protagonist only realizes how late it is once she leaves Mage's Alley. She scolds herself for not heading back sooner and slips into the mansion, stopping short when she sees the halls buzzing with activity. Servants rush about, carrying tools and lamps. A staff member greets her and explains everything is happening under His Grace's orders. She freezes and blurts out that he's awake. Looking up, she spots Caden Crown standing on the balcony and asks why everyone is working so late. He calmly acknowledges her return. Her shock deepens when she notices he's in his partial wolf form again. She demands to know why he's making the staff work at this hour. Caden replies that she's the one who complained about the darkness and asked for more lights. The realization hits her hard. He's been pushing the staff through the night because of her words. Guilt washes over her. She snaps at him that she never asked for this and orders the staff to stop and go to bed. Caden protests, but the servants hesitate, glancing between them. Some whisper that maybe they should listen to her, remembering she once knocked his grace out. Caden sharply tells them to stop. Growling, he asks why he should listen to her. She reminds him of their earlier agreement and firmly orders him never to mention penalties again. He clenches his jaw and agrees, then coldly adds that he can now do whatever he wants at night since he won't remember it anyway. She's stunned by how things escalated so fast. She notices the halls are indeed brighter and briefly wonders if he did it to be considerate. She laughs it off and tells him to return to the basement instead of prowling around. He snaps back that he doesn't want her causing more trouble and insists he's free to do as he pleases. She fires back that if he insists on roaming, he should at least do something useful. Caden finally snaps. He grabs her roughly, telling her to know her place. She struggles, shouting that he's hurting her and demanding he let go, accusing him of acting like everything was for her sake when he nearly killed her before. With a growl, he throws her aside and storms off, slamming the door. She lies on the floor, catching her breath, bitterly wishing she'd brought a bat. His words echo in her head, and she scoffs at the idea he did any of it for her. Furious and shaken, she shouts that she hates this place. The next morning, she wakes determined not to let him get under her skin. A long walk, she decides, will calm her down. In the gardens, Caden suddenly runs up to her and tells her to wait. He grabs her arm and says they need to talk. She asks what's wrong, and he bluntly questions whether she really knocked him unconscious, tied him up, kissed him, and fought with him. Stunned, she asks who told him. He answers that Melvin did. She curses the butler under her breath. Caden sighs and tells her she doesn't need to do anything for him. All he asks is that she remain his wife in name and attend some social events with him. He says he doesn't expect more, and admits he can't stand himself when he transforms. He doesn't want her hurt or forced to see that side of him. She's surprised he isn't angry about her interference. She apologizes and promises to stay away at night. He asks her to do exactly that, stressing it isn't safe. She agrees, reminding herself to stay focused on avoiding trouble and finding her way home. She apologizes for taking up his time. He says it's fine and reminds her again to stay away during the full moon. She laughs and says she understands. As his carriage pulls away, she narrows her eyes, thinking last night still went too far. If he won't remember anything anyway, maybe she can teach him a small lesson. The idea makes her grin. She takes out the potion of nightmares, recalling the warning that only 1 drop is needed. Just as she considers slipping it into his food, a voice cuts in. Caden appears in his wolf form and asks if she's planning to poison him. She jumps in shock and hurriedly insists it isn't poison. He accuses her of wanting him dead so she can run off with his fortune. She tries to explain, but he lunges, grabbing her by the neck and snarling that she shouldn't lie, unless she wants to learn the hard way. She cries out Caden Crown's name, and he freezes, his wolf form visibly startled. She begs him to stop, insisting that he is still human and ordering him to let her go. Using the brief opening, she strikes him hard and immediately forces the potion of nightmares into his mouth. His strength gives out, and he collapses unconscious. She exhales shakily, looking down at him and murmuring that she hopes he has sweet dreams. The next day, Caden sits at the dining table as if nothing happened. He looks perfectly fine, and she stares at him in disbelief, wondering how he can be unaffected after the potion. When talk turns to an upcoming masquerade, she realizes such events are usually held at night, and questions whether he can even attend. In her mind, his cheerful daytime self and his violent nighttime form feel like 2 different people. Caden casually asks if they should attend together. She hesitates, reminding him that he transforms at night, but he calmly replies that they can leave before the moon rises. That logic checks out. He adds that it is time to formally introduce her to His Imperial Highness. She's surprised by the mention of the Crown Prince, vaguely recalling that the original Eileen met him at her debutante ball, though she herself remembers almost nothing about him. She admits large events make her nervous, but Caden reassures her not to worry and tells her she will have him by her side. Later, he mentions having a slight headache and plans to return early. She immediately suspects the potion is the cause and feels a twinge of guilt. Deciding she needs a proper dress for the masquerade, she calls for her maids. Julie is thrilled but hesitates, pointing out there are barely any dresses left. The truth hits her, she sold them. She realizes this is more serious than she thought. Casual clothes won't do, and she refuses to spend her own money, so she decides the expense will go on Caden Crown's tab. With renewed confidence, she declares they're going shopping. During the carriage ride to the plaza, her excitement fades when the rattling makes her nauseous. Julie quickly offers motion sickness medicine, which she gratefully takes. At the plaza's high-end boutiques, the shopkeeper greets her warmly. She asks for a dress, and options are presented immediately. Julie gushes over the gowns, but she finds most of them gaudy. One catches her eye as acceptable, while Julie insists a flashy red and gold piece is perfect for a masquerade. To her, they all look like costumes. She tries on a dark, refined dress that suits her far better than she expected. Julie is so overwhelmed she faints on the spot. Looking at her reflection, the protagonist notes that Eileen's appearance is striking, almost doll-like, and that it feels unsettlingly different. Julie admits it's in the hundreds of millions. The number makes her wince. She wonders how the family fell so far, suspecting gambling or reckless spending. Then a heavier thought settles in. When she returns to her own body, the real Eileen will come back to this one. If she leaves behind a crushing debt, what will happen to her? She imagines a fragile girl breaking down, lost and desperate, and the thought leaves her uneasy. That night, the transformed Caden Crown pounds on the locked door, demanding it be opened. From the other side, the protagonist listens with a tired sigh, thinking she knew this would happen. Ever since she used the potion, his nights have been filled with nightmares. The only relief is that once morning comes, he remembers nothing. The potion affects only his wolf form. The werewolf rages, cursing the repeated nightmares and demanding to know what she fed him. He threatens that once he gets out, she will pay. The staff calmly remind him they are following his own orders to keep him confined at night. When he recognizes her voice, he snarls at her. She fires back without hesitation, telling him not to complain if his hands are sore in the morning. When he orders her to open the door, she asks what he plans to do otherwise, and reminds him that he personally gathered the staff and gave those orders. She throws his actions back at him, asking if he really expects to be let out after nearly strangling her. The answer is clearly no. Announcing she is done for the night, she bids everyone goodnight and leaves. As she walks away, she notices the halls are finally bright and no longer feel eerie. She briefly wonders if he did all this trying to be considerate, then dismisses the thought. After everything, she decides he deserves every drop of that potion. The next morning, Caden Crown sits calmly while Sid wraps a bandage around his foot. He casually asks if anything happened during the night. Sid laughs it off, saying not really. His Grace only shouted to be let out for a while. Before Caden can press further, an imperial messenger arrives. The message formally invites the Duke and Duchess of Crown to attend the masquerade. Caden introduces his wife, and she greets the messengers politely before they leave, clearly expecting their attendance. Afterward, she quietly asks Sid about the crown prince, then turns to Caden and asks if he is heading to work. When he says he has the day off, she brightens and suggests they take a walk so she can ask him a few questions. During the walk, Caden notices her shivering and immediately brings her inside, seating her by the fireplace. She insists she is fine, admitting that while she usually handles the cold well, this body is weak and needs exercise. When she sneezes, he panics and calls for blankets, worried she might catch a cold. She protests that it was only a sneeze and that he is overreacting. Once things settle, she asks him directly why he married her, laughing awkwardly at how blunt it sounds. She points out that he could have taken her as a maid but chose to make her his wife. Caden answers honestly. He married her because it benefited him. As a noblewoman, her status strengthens his own position, since the palace only acknowledges stability once a man is married. She then asks why the contract lasts exactly 1 year. He explains that a year is enough for others to believe the marriage is real. After that, she is free to leave, and he has no intention of restricting her life beyond the contract. However, he adds that she cannot meet her family or anyone who already knows her face, as they cannot risk exposing the marriage as a facade. He admits he believed the original Eileen would endure the year quietly and then return to her former life, so he planned to have someone keep an eye on her. The realization hits her hard. Internally, she wonders if Eileen and her family knew all of this and still agreed, whether they were truly that desperate. Caden calmly recalls her words from the day she signed the contract, saying she claimed to have resolve and was prepared. Eileen steels herself and accepts that she will never see her family again. She imagines how much courage the original Eileen must have forced herself to show while trembling, all because of her father's debt. The thought leaves her bitter. She curses him for selling his own daughter and suspects that desperation is exactly why he agreed to the payout. As Caden tells her that he wants her time at the estate to be comfortable and offers to provide anything she needs, Eileen's thoughts drift elsewhere. Instead of relief, she starts wondering if she can squeeze even more money out of him. The Whites couldn't have been the only family drowning in debt, so why did he choose her specifically? When she asks him outright, Caden freezes and struggles to answer. Before he can respond, a servant arrives with medicine, cutting the moment short. Caden immediately brightens and presents the remedy to her, assuring her it will help her feel better. Eileen tries to protest that she doesn't need it, but the moment she tastes it, she nearly gags. Caden explains it's a traditional cold remedy passed down through the Crown family, made only with the finest ingredients. He insists she drink every drop for it to work properly, brushing off her request to take only half. Exhausted after forcing it down, Eileen quickly falls asleep. Caden quietly carries her back to her chambers, with the staff following. The next morning, Eileen wakes to birds chirping, her body still weak and sluggish. Her thoughts are interrupted when a servant announces that her dresses have arrived. She heads out eagerly, only to freeze in shock at the sight of 3 entire carriages filled with clothing and gifts. For a moment, she worries she went too far. When the butler greets her and she apologizes, explaining she had nothing suitable for the masquerade, he laughs and comments that he hadn't realized she was so frugal. Eileen is left baffled, wondering what kind of world considers 3 carriages worth of dresses frugal. Refocusing, she turns to the next problem on her list, dancing. She asks Caden to practice with her, and he readily agrees. But the timing is tight. His work ends at 6, dinner is at 7, and his transformation usually begins at 9, leaving only a single hour to practice each day. The lesson goes poorly. Eileen is clumsy, repeatedly stepping on Caden's feet with her heels. He winces through the pain, but tries to reassure her, while she realizes her core strength is non-existent. She admits she's never danced before and consoles herself that it can be entirely her fault she's this terrible when it gets too late for Caden to continue. She turns to the staff, only to find that none of them are tall enough or know how to dance at all. Unwilling to give up, she ends up standing outside Caden's room late at night, dreading what comes next. She knocks, hoping to ask for extra lessons, determined not to embarrass herself by dancing with his wolf form at the ball. When there's no response, she assumes he's asleep and leans against the door. It suddenly opens, and a transformed Caden grabs her. With wolf ears visible and a sharp glare, he snarls that he can't sleep with her constant noise and asks if this is another attempt to kill him. He brings up the potion and the fact that she's been stabbing his feet all evening. Eileen hurriedly apologizes, explaining that's exactly why she needs more practice. Caden scoffs and asks if practice can really fix someone with 2 left feet. She forces herself to stay calm, reminding herself he's still a wealthy, powerful man she can't afford to antagonize. To prove her seriousness, she kicks off her shoes and grabs his hand, declaring they'll practice right there in his chambers since he can't leave anyway. Caden is visibly taken aback. He tells her to use her words next time, and accuses her of wanting to stop only because he disgusts her. She tries to deny it, but he cuts her off, saying she's lying, that she's having second thoughts and looking for an escape because she thinks he'll eat her. Leaning in, he adds dryly that she's not entirely wrong, because right now she looks quite tasty. Caden reflects on his situation. Despite his immense wealth, he knows people whisper behind his back. He has overheard claims that he is unqualified, undeserving of his palace position, and that he he lacks legitimacy because he is not married. He understands he should ignore such rumors, yet the criticism lingers, especially as his gaze falls on Eileen. Eileen, meanwhile, is in no mood for romance. She smacks his transformed self with a pillow and tells him to stop being ridiculous, pointing out that wolves do not actually eat people. Caden concedes she is right, while Eileen grumbles about how much she hates his constant teasing. She steers the focus back to dancing, though Caden reminds her she was the one who interrupted. Even so, she nervously confirms again that he will not actually eat her, refusing to become a laughingstock at the ball. The practice itself is exhausting. Caden corrects her posture, tells her which foot to lead with, and orders her to stop staring at the floor. He pushes her to follow the rhythm until she is completely winded and begs for a break. His patience finally snaps, and he tells her to leave, shutting the door behind her. Left alone in the hallway, Eileen fumes, frustrated that he turned harsh just when he had started acting decent. With only one day left before the ball, her mood lifts when her finished dress arrives. Her maids are awestruck, praising how radiant she looks in the perfectly fitted gown. Eileen feels a brief pang of guilt for yelling at the shopkeeper earlier. During their final daytime rehearsal, she remains tense, but Caden, now in human form, gently reassures her that she is doing well. When she stumbles, he catches her immediately. She admits she is terrified of tripping during the ball, and he promises that if she falls, he will catch her. The contrast unsettles her. She wonders how the calm, gentle man before her can be the same person as the aggressive wolf. Determined not to embarrass him, she decides to ask the wolf for help one last time. This time, she shows up wearing a pot on her head and a makeshift apron. When Caden asks what she is wearing, she proudly calls it armor. She explains the frying pan in her hand is for self-defense and warns him not to try anything. He stares at her in disbelief, but she insists she is ready to practice. As they move through the steps, Caden remarks that she clearly dislikes him and asks if she plans to scowl like that at the ball. Eileen immediately forces a bright smile. Watching her, Caden thinks about the cruel rumors surrounding her, that she was not married but sold, and that her family is drowning in debt. He wants to protect her, not wanting her to become a target because of him.